plica. It's just not getting better at the moment. So it's very boring. It's very boring and it's really disabling.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Right, so it says I'm redirecting to Facebook Live and it's twiddling and twirling. Okay, that's... Oh, it looks like we might be live. It's done something slightly different to normal. Right, okie dokie. Hello, everybody. Once again, it's me, I'm Benedicte Symcox. As you can see, it says I'm Lisa Stratford. I'm not. I'm still Benedicte. But we're both at Family Voice, sorry, so that's fine. And it's just technology has me slightly scuppered. I'm so pleased to be joined by Mark Brown. I'm sure lots of you have seen his talk that was streamed earlier this morning, I think it was.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mark. We've had so many that I've lost track of what's when. I know that I found it really helpful. For those of you who don't know already, I've got 3 kids, all of whom are in transition, 2 of whom are neurodiverse. So it was really, really relevant. And I know that I have a few questions in my head, but I'm here mostly to ask Mark the questions that you have. Mark, is there, I don't know if you had a chance, I can't remember in your talk, to introduce yourself and kind of say, who do you want to give a little bit of an introduction?
Okay, yeah, so I'm Mark Brown. I'm an independent special needs consultant. And what I do is I come into people's homes. I work with the individual and the family and all relevant professionals around a whole range of things such as behaviour, anxiety and obsessions, a lot around puberty and sexuality. That sort of, don't know whether it's my favourite subject, but it's the one that a lot of people know me more about because I did a PhD in it as well. So so I work with the individuals to try and get it from their point of view and put stuff together that is relevant to help them.
Great. So actually, I should have introduced Dr. Brown.
I'm still used to eating one.
I know, I have in the past been one of Mark's families, so I've experienced the way that he works with individuals, and it's really interesting and powerful to see how if you can work with our young people from where they are and kind of come outwards rather than trying to impose things on them. It feels like such a different approach to certainly historically the ones that professionals have and the system has adopted with our kids a lot of the time. So the first question is kind of one of those almost generic but really potentially helpful ones, was could you please post some recommended resources on the chat? I don't know if there are any you have that spring to mind that then my little minions in the background can type up.
If you would just give me a second, because luckily I work from home now. Hold on.
Fantastic. Isn't it wonderful doing live Q&As like this? Don't think we've ever had it quite this interactive though. This is brilliant.
And hold on, one more. Where is it? There we go. Right. Okay. So these are some, and with the resources that I tend to use, I mean, I've also developed my own. I tend to look at the resources and go, that looks like something I can do with the individual, but I wouldn't necessarily take it absolute. So the ones that I've got, we have a couple of, these are quite old. Kylie, hold on, where am I? It's difficult to do on the camera. Kylie, yeah. Jason, and that's a combination of the two. And these are quite simplistic cartoons. They've been used a lot in schools, but they are quite useful. I think they've updated them. I'm just waiting for the latest ones to come through. Then we have All About Us, which these are quite, all of these are easy to get. You either get them from Family Planning Association, Amazon, eBay. This comes with a book that goes along with it. And this DVD, it's still cartoony, but it's more teenager level of cartoon. And it just goes through lots of little bits and pieces, relationships, sex, masturbation, goes through all of those sorts of bits. The New Guide to Relationships and Sex, another DVD. So that's there again. It's very similar to All About Us. It's very much a case of just go through those. And then we have, you can see how long I've had this one because I haven't got an up-to-date version. You got the talking together about growing up, which the nice thing about that is there's lots of pictures and some activities. You also have the one about contraception. There is also one about sex. There is also a free resource online which is done by the CTPLD in, I think it was York. I will double check and give you the information. And that is completely free. You download it as a PDF, and I use it a heck of a lot of the time. And then this one I partly plug because I've actually got a chapter in this one. Sexuality and learning disabilities, which each chapter has been written by a different professional from a different point of view. I wrote the, as they titled it, Masturbation by Mark Brown, which was a bit inconvenient when they said that, but it goes through things like the legalities, sex education, abuse, how to help with those sorts of things. Other than that, what I tend to do is I tend to say to people, the amount of sex education materials that you can get on the internet is massive. But the thing to remember, and it actually came up in the research I did, that the material has to be adapted for people with learning disabilities, but it also has to be further adapted for an autistic individual because of the way that it's aimed. And, you know, it's one of the difficulties with all of the, especially the relationship materials, is the fact of sex education, sex and relationship education. Out of that much is about sex. The rest is about the grey area. Yeah. And a lot of schools that I worked with during the research that I did actually said, we can do the biological side easy. The other bits, it's really difficult. So that's why I say, look at the books, get an idea of what you're looking for, and then start adapting. Also, YouTube is a great access. There's one called Just Send It, which is about sexting, which I use with the groups I work with. One that's called, it's actually called Assembly Consequences because it was done by a school, which is about online safety. And there's one that is Good Bad Relationships, which allows you to see the same scenes, but done in a good way and a bad way, which is really good because it allows me to sit down and talk to people and go, why, what was good, what was bad. And there's a whole ton of other stuff. But those ones are the key ones that I tend to access, but then a lot of it is stuff that I've put together, or there was a group of us that did some stuff. So if anybody ever wants anything, they can give me a shout, because we use things like The Man at the Crossroads, which is about decision making and, you know, all these sort of things.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. I was also particularly in that world of sex and relationship education and that sex bit. I remember when I was trying to support particularly my daughter, and having been to one of your puberty talks early, we started really early. But I, in trying to find resources for her, I think I became aware of the fact that as a parent, we bring all of our ideas and ethics and morals, don't we? And there were websites that I was uncomfortable with for reasons that I couldn't quite figure out, but I was able to then look at the ones that I felt comfortable in and then try and take in her issues as well. I suppose, and I wonder how much you find that when you're working with families, you're having to work with cultural differences and
although saying that, to be quite honest, although there are cultural differences, often because I'm being called when there's often been an issue, the cultural differences sort of go out the window. It's a case of that. I mean, you know, and I try not to talk about masturbation too much, because it always seems I always talk about it. But I, you know, I've had to teach certain people about masturbation where if they didn't, they were going to do themselves physical harm, and it went against their cultural background. However, the families in both of those cases just said, you know, we want them to be safe.
Yeah.
You know, there are occasions where you do have to talk through things and do some adapting. But yeah, a lot of the time it's because people are so unfortunately desperate because there's not much out there concerning sex education. It is very much a case of, okay, you know, we'll go with the flow. Because also one of the difficulties is a lot of the individuals that I work with don't necessarily worry about cultural backgrounds. If their body says they need to do something to their body, they're going to do something to their body, regardless of what mum, dad, whoever says and goes, you know, you can't do that because that's against our religious beliefs or our cultural beliefs. I can tell you this now, they will still go ahead and do it. And as I always say, I would much rather they knew what was safe and what was appropriate rather than hiding it away and not doing it. The interesting thing, though, is and it wasn't necessarily culture, it was an assumption. I did have one incident where, and usually when it comes to things like masturbation, it's, you know, people, oh my God, no. I had somebody who was doing it in an inappropriate place because it was only found out when we were talking. Although nobody had ever said he couldn't do it in his bedroom, nobody had actually said he could. So he didn't actually know where he was allowed to do it until we actually turned around and went, yeah, bedroom, door shut, curtains closed, nobody on your iPad or anything like that. So it's often we make assumptions rather than it being religious beliefs.
And of course, this is all an area where most of us have brought up with, we don't talk about a lot of this, particularly around masturbation. And I know as a parent of autistic young people, I've had to teach myself to not be embarrassed about a whole host of things. And then, of course, we ask our teachers in schools to do that, don't we? Which is a big one.
But also, and it's amazing how many people in the research, the sex education coordinator said, we have teachers that are actually scared of doing it. They are embarrassed themselves, and they won't actually teach it. So, you know, and with the internet these days, if we don't talk about these things, then what will happen is the individual will go off and find it on the internet. And, you know, if you see the wrong stuff on the internet, I've had a few where they've accessed pornographic sites and they've looked and gone, oh, this is how I have a relationship. And then having to unpick that because, you know, it's not really been discussed or examined.
Can I, if I move on to the next question, I think it feels like it follows on in some way. This person's school report says that the young person, this young man, is particularly vulnerable because he doesn't understand the concept of deceit. How do I start from this level of understanding through to people trying to falsely befriend him due to their own bad intentions?
Okay, so a lot of this, there's a few activities that when I do my group work, we tend to do. So we do things like we talk about what a good friend is, what a bad friend is. We talk about it from their perspective, from somebody else's perspective. We also do a lot of stuff concerning video work and scenarios. One of the biggest things that I've learned over the years doing the relationship and sex education and consent, it is a waste of time turning around to any of the individuals I work with and go, do you understand? Because most of the time they will go, yes. And if we then move on, you know, they haven't understood it or they need to explore it more. So especially with sort of friendships and relationships, it's not just a case of this is what a good friend does, what a bad friend does. It's looking at scenarios. So I do a lot of stuff where we look at scenarios. I've even had it where we've looked at things like the soap operas and just sort of gone, right, okay, let's have a look. Was that a good thing? Was that bad? Why? And it's that thing of getting them to analyze it and analyze it and analyze it until, you know, they're at that stage where they can actually spend a bit of time just thinking. And as I say to them, you think about what the situation is. If you make the wrong choice, fine. If you've actually learned, if you've thought about it, and this is when I mentioned the man at the crossroads, this is what we use, it's a visual concerning green or red pathway. Then what happens is at least you've made that decision consciously, whereas a lot of the ones I work with, it's impulsive. It's like, right, okay, yeah, bang, okay, I'm going to go and do this. You know, I've got one who used to climb derelict buildings because his best mate said it would be fun to go over all the windows. You know, and we spent a lot of time going, right, let's look at it, let's analyze it. Also, we looked at actual things that happened to them, and sort of reflected and gone, was it a good thing, was it a bad thing? So, you know, I would be saying to that parent, look at those sorts of aspects. You've got to remember, when it comes to things like relationships, friendships, all this aspect of life, most individuals are not going to be open to discussions. You know, especially it being mum and dad.
Yeah.
So it's very much a case of what you sometimes have to do. You have to do it covertly. So if you're watching TV and there's a relationship issue, have a chat about that.
And presumably, often it might be have a chat with the other parent rather than with the person themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I have a few occasions where, you know, parents are having a conversation, and you know the child is sort of listening, but because it's not aimed at them. Or the other thing that I do, and I'm a bit renowned for, is doing other things while we're talking. So, you know, I play on the Xbox, I play with dolls, Lego. I used to jump up and down on trampolines, but I can't now because my knees are too bad. Play football, anything, drawing, anything. That what it does is, while you're doing that, they're focusing on that, and you can start having conversations while you're not looking. So if you're playing on a computer game, you can be looking at the screen and going, yeah, fine. How's it all going? And you can start having those conversations because they feel less pressured than if you sit down and go, right, now tell me about your friend. What's happening with your best friend?
Do you know, I've found that the car is the place where I've been able to have the most valuable conversations with my lot. And it's that similar. They're slightly prisoner, but there's no eye contact and there's no force or anything, and mum can get sidetracked by traffic if she needs to.
And that's the big thing, because it's a bit like talking about emotions. It's very heavy stuff, and if we open up that can of worms, what's going to happen? But we have to open it up regardless of whether they want to or not, because we need to be thinking about the future, and it is just a case of trying to work our way in, even if it's very subtle.
Thank you. This next question makes me think, oh yes, I need this question. Any tips for an overprotective parent to get out of the catch-22 trap, whereby they don't expose their child to risk and hence can't find a natural situation in which to discuss it? Can I add to that? Yes. What if your young person has created this protective bubble around themselves because they are so scared of exposing themselves to risk that actually you're in this catch-22? So either that overprotective parent or indeed the young person themselves.
Okay, so I mean, a lot of the times, especially when it comes to the relationship side of it, the social side of it, it's very much a case of I tend to sort of say to parents, we need to teach the skills first. We need to teach the understanding first. And then it's being able to give that little bit of freedom by, you know, doing minor things. So, for example, you know, if one of the aspects is about socializing, when you're out shopping, trying to encourage the person just to walk slightly ahead and do some bits and pieces. I mean, I had one person who just wanted to go down to the shop at the corner. And to actually do it safely, we had to look at relationships, we had to look at, you know, road safety, a whole range of stuff. And what we did was, the first time they went, I walked with them. But when we got to the shop, that's what they did. They dealt with it. And we gradually but surely just gave ground on certain bits. So crossing the road, they were the one that took the lead. And then eventually we got to the stage where I shadowed them. And they knew I was there. I shadowed them. But you know, they were the ones that actually were taking the lead. So you know, it's very much a case of with the relationship side of it, it's trying to do it in a controlled fashion where you can gradually release your grip on the situation. Concerning the individual and putting their own bubble around them, a lot of that is going to be exploring with them what are the issues, what are the things. I mean, often it happens because, for example, somebody being bullied, or they've had a negative experience of socializing and being around people. So it's then a case of being able to explore that. And I have known some professionals where they've gone, well, don't worry, you won't be bullied again, or you won't be mugged again. And I actually had that said to one person who'd been mugged, and then a month later got mugged. So it was, and you can't say you will never. You just say let's put in the coping strategies, but only, and this is one of those occasions of having that conversation, because you need to understand, why do they feel that they need to be in that bubble? What are they protecting themselves from? Is it something that you've got a bit of control over, or is it something that
the world, viruses, people?
Exactly. And I mean, I often say to individuals I work with, when they say, "Oh, how's this going to work?" I say, "Well, what happened is, through me talking to you, we'll either find out whether everybody else needs to change, whether you need to change, or hard luck, there's a third bit where we can't do anything, so we need to help you just cope with it, because that's life." And at the moment with the pandemic, that's a good example, because I've got a few where, quite a lot, where it's had an impact. And one of the things I've been saying to them is, right, okay, I know one of the worries is the pandemic. We can't do anything about it, so let's just acknowledge that that's going to be here in your head until this all finishes, and probably afterwards as well. But then there's other things we can change, and it's the same with relationships. It's just, I think it's one of those things where we have to be truthful. It is no use being, let's sugarcoat this, because if you sugarcoat it, some great big mess is going to come along and take that sugarcoating away, and will just reinforce what they've said and done.
Absolutely. Thank you. Right. Oh, there's a long one. Is it quite common for someone with neurodiversity to not appear to have a sexual interest or preference? So my daughter shows no interest, but I worry that she may be shy and just not have the confidence to ask questions. This is clearly an open, non-judgmental families. Should I attempt to open up a conversation or allow her to be the instigator?
Right, okay, I do have a number, and I've got a number of families where they're oh my God, they've shown no signs of wanting a relationship. And it's gone, when you have a chat, I had a chat with one recently, and he went, actually, yeah, I don't. I never, he did give me a criteria for this, for any potential partner, which was completely impossible. And so it was like, so fine, okay, you don't want a relationship. Are you happy with all aspects? And it is one of the things that we have to recognise. And I think I said it in the talk about, sometimes we put our social values to, social skills. You've got to be able to do this and do that. But actually, it's recognising that there's a lot of people that don't want to do that socialising. There's a lot of people that don't want to be involved with relationships. There's also some that want relationships, and it gets them into trouble because they're so desperate. So one of the things I would be saying to that family would be, if the daughter does express no interest in relationships, and actually it's an actual, she is expressing that. It's not her going, no, I don't want one. You haven't explored it. You need to explore it with them. If that's the case, then it may not necessarily be that she's lonely. It may just be she actually just doesn't like being around people. I have quite a few that won't socialise face to face. You put them on the computer playing Minecraft or playing Fortnite or playing any Roblox, they are the most sociable animals going. It's just that they can't cope with that. Concerning how to breach the situation, a lot of it just depends. I mean, I would possibly be sort of saying, in a sense, as we said earlier on, about having a conversation, but not necessarily with her, and just talking about friendships, talking about relationships, and being able to just sort of pull her in a little bit so that maybe she can be part of that conversation. If she suddenly disappears and runs off, it's probably a case of she's finding it difficult to go. So she will need to have that conversation with somebody separately. But I would say, if you can have a conversation just to double check, and if she turns around and says, no, I don't really want a relationship, don't panic. Also, I do find that there's a lot of people I know that as a teenager didn't want a relationship, but when they were an adult, they were desperate for one. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't ever want it. It's just at this moment in time, they're particularly overwhelmed by the social world, and they see a relationship as part of that. So I'm just not going to take part in those sorts of things.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So I don't know whether this we may have covered this when we talked about resources, but we've got one parent who's asking specifically about TV programs that can help explain appropriate sexual relationships and how to deal with a potential situation that could make them uncomfortable. So this person has a young person who's got a very good understanding, but with an ASD diagnosis. They watched the sex education series on Netflix, which they found really helpful to understand the complexities. I know one of mine absolutely loved that show because everything was out in the open. I wonder what your experience is and if there is anything else that you know of.
I don't know of anything else. I mean, you've got the factual stuff, but unfortunately with the factual stuff, there again, it's one of those things where they talk about relationships and where something like sex education, that talks about it, but also shows it.
Yeah.
So, there isn't, and I think this is one of the difficulties, there isn't that much out there that is explicitly, we're going to talk about these things, we're going to show it in practice. That's why I say a lot of the stuff is YouTube based, just because you've got lots of people that have put stuff together. And sometimes the best stuff that's been put together have been the ones done by school kids, colleges, where they've had to do it as a filming project, and it's like, actually, this is a really good piece of material.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you. Similar kind of thing, but a more specific one. Do you have, and again, I'm sorry because I don't know the particular resources you shared earlier. Do you have some good ones for explaining to a teenage girl about masturbation, including that it's normal?
Right, okay, yeah. So it would be, that would probably be the best one.
So that's all about us. And yes. I know we're going to try and make sure that we've got the links that we can put to those.
Also, just trying to think, there's a few bits online. Hold on, what I said, the one that's free, I will try and find it actually while we're just chatting away. And what that does is that has quite a lot of good visuals in there that sort of just explain it. I've used that a couple of times to actually teach a young lady to actually masturbate herself. And I'm just trying to find it, so I keep talking. But there again, it is just trying to get the right materials so that you can actually adapt it in an appropriate fashion for the individual. There we go, gotcha. Right, so, and I can, that's what I love about this technology, I should be able to share the screen.
Oh, magic. I've got to see if I may have to change permissions or something, I don't know. Let me know if you're allowed to share the screen.
I'm just waiting for it to upload. So yeah, so I mean, there again, with teaching masturbation, whether it's a boy or a girl, it is just getting the right materials and being able to adapt those materials to the individual needs. Plus, I mean, it's lovely to hear a parent who actually is looking at teaching masturbation. Right, now I'm going to see whether I can actually share this. Now, let me. Right, no, you'll have to give me permission, but that's no worry. Don't panic. I'll just give you the title.
Yes, please.
Right, so the title is. It's from NHS Leeds, and it's the Children's Learning Disability Team. It's Puberty and Sexuality for Children and Young People with a Learning Disability.
Brilliant. I'm going to guess that my little minions are doing that, and otherwise what we'll do is once we've done our thing, we'll go back and we'll put that link in. Fantastic.
And with that one, that has an awful lot of visuals, and it's, they're pen pictures, but it's actually, I use it quite a lot for my teachings.
Great, thank you so much. onwards, what advice would you give to those with learning disabilities who are experiencing identity and gender issues? How can we support with confusion? I suspect actually learning disabilities or even not.
Yeah. I mean, I have, there again, I'm quite a few that I work with that have got, they're looking at their gender, they're trying to think about, you know, trying to get their heads around it all. One of the biggest things concerning gender has been the fact that there isn't the appropriate support. You know, even with those that are actually transitioning, some of the transition clinics have actually said that the approach that they take, especially with somebody who's autistic, the approach that they take with a neurotypical person is not appropriate for somebody who's neurodiverse.
Right.
Partly because of the way that they do things. And so, you know, also they've found in research that sometimes the individual got confused between their feelings about gender and feelings about being gay or bisexual. So, you know, there's been, it's not a lot of research, but there's been a bit. I tend to what we tend to do is it's there again, it's sitting down, it's having a conversation, it's going, okay, do you understand the identities, do you understand the sexualities, do you understand the concepts? It's also recognizing that for some people it's not necessarily they want to change gender, they just want to be gender neutral because it makes life a lot easier for them. I mean, I've got one who, you know, they've said if they could remove their breast but keep the vagina, they'll be quite happy because that means they're smack bang in the middle because they don't want to be either. So just because somebody actually starts expressing thoughts about their gender and changing gender, it doesn't often mean it doesn't automatically mean they want to. It just means, you know, they may be uncomfortable, there may be some confusions, and it's about having those conversations. And I've had a few that have transitioned that I've worked with as well. But there again, it is having to have a different conversation because of the processing. And trying to delve deeply into that.
And do you find that the support that there is out there for young people like that actually is coming from individual experts such as yourself or people rather than through the system?
Yeah. You know, it's a real shame that there aren't more of us because, you know, because it is a growing aspect of sex and relationships, and it's also about trying to get schools and organizations, day services, to conceptualize the issues because of the fact that you know, it's just not working. It's, you know, just not working. It's not right for a school to turn around to somebody and say, well, you can't go into the boys because you might be sexually molested by the boys. You can't go into the girls because you might sexually molest those. By the way, your toilet is going to be the disabled toilet. No, that's not right.
No.
And then it impacts upon the individual because then they start feeling that what they're doing is wrong when actually what they're doing is they're trying to come to terms with it, and it's confusing enough for somebody who's neurotypical, let alone somebody who's neurodiverse.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Oh, I love this one. Do you know when you get people who are just so open and willing to be, it starts with, I have heart failure, just thinking about letting my child go to the shops on their own. Are there ways to track someone via a gadget like a watch where they have an emergency button to dial home?
Yes, there are. You can. I'm trying to think. There was a watch stroke bracelet. You'd have to look at online. They are out there. I have had people. A lot of the times, people have. It's been more about when they've gone to, say, theme parks, or they've gone up to London just to make sure that if they did get parted, they would be able to find them. Also, depending on what phones you've got, iPhones, for example, has got Find a Phone. Of course, it does depend upon whether the young individual wants to be traced. I had somebody that we were giving a bit of freedom on condition that they didn't turn the phone off, and then turned the phone off, and wondered why we were about ready to send the police out looking for him. So there are gadgets out there. You just have to look for them, and also it's remembering that, especially if you've got a teenager, the gadget, if you're going to give them something to go on their wrist or something, it needs to look normal.
Cool. Yes.
Cool, because if it doesn't, it's not going on there. But also, if you give them the incentive to be able to get them to understand, well, if we do this, you're going to have a bit more freedom, then that's going to motivate them as well.
We had, as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking of one of the first times that we did proper kind of freedom. And so my two eldest wanted to go to Comic-Con, and I went with them by train, but I decided I wasn't going to get a ticket. I was going to sit outside for the 4 hours. Loving parent. And they went in, and actually I have to say, Comic-Con, just such an amazingly beautiful, inclusive place. But they went in, I think it was one of these big venues, and my daughter's phone carried on working, but they decided to split up, and my son's phone signal just went. And so for about half an hour, my daughter was kind of going, I don't know where he is. And they'd agreed a meeting place. Turns out there were two Costas. And actually, I suppose that being that little bit older, I remember that heart failure feeling. And actually, for half an hour, it was kind of, oh my God. And I did manage to speak to one of these security guards, but they eventually found their way to the exit because there aren't that many. And they're all still alive.
Yeah. And in a sense, and I say quite often when I talk about this, in a sense, it's no different to any individual. You at some point have to go, oh my God. It's just that often with somebody who's neurodiverse, you've got a hell of a lot more that you've got to be thinking of. I mean, I remember the first time I let my two girls, in primary school, they were allowed to walk in year 6. And it was like, right, you have your phone, and you phone me even if I'm working. You will phone me when you leave. You will phone me home, and you'll phone me when you get back. And if they didn't, I had all, they've been kidnapped, they've been run over, all those sorts of things. So it's no different concerning that part of it, but it's just what we need to teach. We need to teach a heck of a lot more, and because it's not going to be black and white as happened with your two. It's not black and white. They thought it was, because they're like, yeah, Costa. Oh, we've got two Costas. Now we're going to have to deal with those. So it's in a sense, it's about trying to cover as much as you can, but you never, ever will.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So I've got more. What about dealing with conflict between the person and others in their care with different opinions?
The joys of negotiation. A lot of the, it depends upon the situation. If it's a teenager with their parents or their siblings, you do have to take into a little bit of account that even if they didn't have any neurodiverse issues, they would probably still be snotty teenagers who will do their power to defy everything. A lot of the time, in my experience, it often requires a lot of time to just explore things. So I've got quite a few that have, and there again, it's that issue of trying to get into their world and their understanding. I have quite a few that will look at everything very logically. And, if their logic fits, then that's fine. However, it's then having to work through that and being able to go, right, okay, that's what you're thinking. And it's one of the things I always say, the way a lot of the ones I work with think, if you think that's the foundation information, we look at that, we might go that way, they go that way. It's not that they're thinking from here to the end is wrong, because it's logical, but it's how it's looked at here. So it's being able to work your way back and go, right, okay, now let's have a look and see, right, there is an alternative pathway. And so often with things such as trying to look at negotiations, trying to look at all those aspects, it's just spending an awful lot of time trying to work out what's going on. And also, a lot of the times when there's these sorts of difficulties, there's an element of control of their environment. And if there's an air of control, I would generally say there's anxiety as well. And so often what you're seeing somebody who's highly anxious, who is trying to keep everything consistent. So what I'm going to do is going to control everything, and my logic is going to assist with that. So it's not only talking through what they're saying at that time, it's exploring the underlying issues that are going on, so they don't need to have those inconsistencies. And at this moment in time, this whole pandemic has just blown that completely out. Everybody's stressed for various reasons, and so everybody's having disagreements. We're thrown together 24/7. There's lots of logic that going on that is not the appropriate logic, let's say. I'm not going to say it's incorrect, but it's appropriate for that time. And so people doing this an awful lot to try and control everything around them. So I think it's also about trying to work on the anxiety that's laying underneath this all, so that they don't need to keep doing those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other aspect that I was wondering about is, what if, particularly in this sex and relationship area, what if you and, let's say, the teachers or the doctors or the, if you have respite care, what if you're finding yourself in conflict with those other adults? Is there
Now this is live, isn't it? So I have to watch what I say. Okay. Some people know that I do professional bash. The one thing I always say about parents, you are the expert of your child. Nobody else is an expert. When I come into somebody's house, I'm not an expert of your child. I'm there to work with you and work with them. When it comes to other professionals, and especially if we're looking at something like sex and relationship education, it's being realistic, it's being factual, and it's knowing what needs to be done. So, for example, I've had numerous occasions where I've gone into schools and into day services to do sex education, and I will frequently be told there's this group of individuals that, through lack of capacity, they will never be able to have sex, so we don't need to talk to them about anything. And I'm going, no. What we need to do is we need to take their education up to and including consent, because these are people that are probably going to require 24/7 care. They need to know, it is their human right to be able to know if somebody is touching my breasts or my penis or my vagina in the wrong way. I can turn around and say no, or I can indicate no. And it is quite interesting how many professionals do go, well, you don't need to talk about that. Do you really need to talk about that?
Wow.
I mean, I've even been told by schools when I do my puberty, you've been to my puberty talk, don't talk about masturbation. They dragged to a ball for me. I doubled the length of time I was talking about it. But the thing is, in that situation, the parents wanted the information. It was the professional, it was the head teacher that was turning around going, no, they don't, the parents don't really want to know that. Actually, you parents want to and need to know everything. When it comes to other professionals, if they're sort of saying, well, do we really? No, we don't really need to talk about those sorts of things. Okay, they need to justify to you, not you justifying to them, why. If they can justify it, then okay, but there is very little concerning sex education that I would say they could justify not teaching or doing.
So actually, it sounds as though what you're saying is that every individual has the right to know and understand as much as they can about all of this.
And one of the difficulties you tend to get as well is the fact that the issue of consent. Now, I have a number of individuals that when I first met them couldn't give consent, because to give consent, you need to understand all the consequences, good and bad. You need to understand the whole kit and caboodle. And they didn't. So technically, if they did anything sexual, they'd broken the law, or whoever was with them would break the law because they didn't consent. However, it didn't mean that we couldn't teach it to them.
Yeah.
And so I've spent ages teaching people, and at the end of it, you know, I even did it. I did it once to a group of year sixes in a autistic specific unit, and by the end of it, we didn't talk about sex because it wasn't appropriate, but we talked about consent. We talked about good and bad touch. By the end of it, I used to walk in. And they used to go, before I used to say anything, they used to go, age of consent is 16, 18 online. Consent means you can say yes, you can give permission, and you're not allowed to have a private partner. And they did me a card, and on there, every day, loads of them went, we know about consent now, Mark. But it was, you know, they needed to know those sorts of things because they need to understand it. So you can actually teach somebody to have informed consent. But if you have somebody that goes, we don't need to teach that, or we shouldn't really be thinking about that, they need to justify it, because we need to give individuals who are neurodiverse the ability and the understanding to keep safe. And that's a big part of keeping safe, saying no.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I think I've got, I mean, I could carry on talking to you forever, but I'm aware of the time. I think this is probably quite a nice way to end, and it's kind of beautifully open-ended. This parent has said, what are is your most frequently asked question around relationships?
Oh, God. Oh, God. Right, okay. Let me see. The questions I get asked, now, if we're talking about the individuals I work with rather than parents,
okay.
Professionals. If we're talking about individuals, let me think. Well, so there'll be things always about age of consent and what does it mean. There's always a conversation, especially if I'm doing the sex education, actual teaching, about online stuff. You always know if somebody's been doing something wrong when I turn around and say it's 18 online, not 16, because their faces suddenly go, oh. We have discussions about how to get a boyfriend or a girlfriend. At the moment, I'm doing a lot of stuff, because we're doing mostly Zoom. I'm doing a lot of stuff where I'm actually going on dating sites with individuals, because there's an autistic dating site that you can access that's free of charge. It's just called autisticdating.net, I want to say, and I have a couple of people that are accessing that. And what we're tending to do is, when I'm doing the work, we spend a lot of time looking at the messages that are flying around and sort of trying to make it appropriate and trying to make sure that it doesn't go wrong. I quite often get asked about the fact that I go to prison sometimes, because I work with sex offenders, and they go, so what does that entail, and what the consequences, because a lot of people don't realise about sex offenders register. I occasionally get the masturbation talk, not often, but I do get things like, how big's my penis, how big are my breasts going to be, when is the hair going to sprout out from my big arm, do I really have to deal with growing up, how do I get a boyfriend, girlfriend? I mean, it is a whole range of stuff, and you then get the odd one or two, like, if I travelled back in time, if I was able to clone myself and have sex with myself, is that legal? And if I travelled back in time and had sex with my mum, would that be legal? So you do have to expect, and also I do occasionally get and a lot of people sort of look and go, what do you mean? I want to be a taxi driver. At that point, I know they've been watching porn sites, because there's a fake taxi.com, which is actually filmed in Surrey. I've had a few occasions where people have seen it gone, oh, that's how you get a girlfriend. And it's like, no, it's all fake. They're all actors and actresses. So we do have those sorts of conversations. And also I do get the more and more about sexuality as well. There's a lot more about sexuality that's coming through concerning how do I know if I'm gay, what does it mean, the issue concerning gender, that often comes up. And then, you know, if I go into certain schools, they'll always ask me about the black box, and I bought the black box, which is basically my condom training box with a tabletop dildo. And all the schools that I do sex education all know, if I come in, they see the black box in a sex education time. So I do get asked some very strange and wonderful questions, but it's one of those occasions where, regardless of how embarrassing they are for me, if I don't answer them, it's more detrimental to the individual. And so, you know, it's one of those occasions. I've been involved with people where somebody else has been in the room with me and the question's been asked, the shock on their face. I can't do that, because if I do, then the person will look at me and go, oh, what have I done that's wrong? I have to be able to talk it through. So I do get some weird and wonderful stuff as well.
Can I just finish, Mark, because I'm going to get really told off if I go over time, by asking clearly, I mean, I don't know, I suspect many of the people watching going, can we access Mark's help? And I know you're only one person. Do you know of any organisations, I suppose, particularly in Surrey, because that's where we are at the moment, where you can get some support? So I'm thinking, with one of my young people, all of this is easy. We talk about everything. You know, she actually did a Facebook Live with me to our parent carer chat group recently. With the other one, there is, I cannot. You know, I'm the last person that they will talk to. Are there places where we can go to get that kind of help or not?
The biggest issue we have is the fact that there are places that will deal with sexuality. Yeah. But not necessarily in the way that is appropriate for somebody who's got neurodiverse issues, particularly if they're autistic. And that is one of the biggest difficulties, because there are loads of organisations. You won't, to be quite honest, you know, there's too many to actually name. If you go on the internet and just put, like, you know, sexuality advice, relationship advice. Right. However, there are very few that will be able to provide the support in the way that a neurodiverse individual will need it. Right. And often it's down to charities and that to try and put stuff together. So, you know, depending on where whether organisations want it, I've done a few keeping safe courses for the individuals, which includes the sex education, online stuff, and we do that because it's geared particularly to somebody who's neurodiverse. And it is one of the sad things. There are a few across the country. There again, it's quite often down to an individual like me, because of the fact that people just don't want to. I think people are scared about getting into the realms of talking about sex and sexuality with individuals that are neurodiverse. There is a few organisations, but they're not necessarily autism specific, and it often comes down to whether there's an individual within that organisation that's got a want to do work with people that are neurodiverse. Okay, well, thank you very much. I think you've given us huge amounts to think about and talk about. I know that if those watching are anything like me, I know, I say, when I first went to one of your puberty talks, that actually shaped the way that I brought my teenagers up, and has been, you know, it's obviously a work in progress and far from perfect, but we've been able to have conversations. And I think what you challenged in me is that I needed to get over any embarrassment, because that was really detrimental to them. So I'm quite sure that between your talk and our chat now,
we're going to have hopefully some impact on a lot of families. Thank you so much for your time.
No problems. And everybody just keep safe. But also, if anybody wants to ask me direct questions, you can quite easily email me. I think the email was put out on my talk. Just in case, it's sh4sn@sky.com. And please feel free, because I've got a lot of stuff that I can email people concerning materials that I've used in that.
Lovely. And actually what we will do, we've got a questions@familyvoicesurrey.org email, and we'll happily send you, it's all getting bonkers. We'll forward questions back and forth if that's okay.
No problems.
Thank you so much. I'm going to press stop on our live recording. Do I want to stop recording? Oh yes, but I also want to stop something else.